Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stluke'sonline.org. Idaho Matters is taking a deep dive into the loss of farmland here in the Gem State. Are you a farmer? What challenges do you face as farmland shrinks in Idaho? We want to hear your story. Email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu or leave us a voicemail using the Talk to Us feature in the Boise State Public Radio app. And then listen to our series on farming called Land and Legacy. Episodes available on Monday afternoons in the Idaho Matters podcast feed. More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudette. They may sound out of this world, but languages like Klingon and Na'vi were created right here on Earth by linguists. And this Thursday, the brilliant minds behind those alien languages will be visiting Boise State University to share how they contributed to the famous worlds of Star Trek and Avatar. So joining us now for a preview are Dr. Mark Okrand, the creator of Klingon, and Dr. Michal Temkin-Martinez, professor and chair of the linguistics department at Boise State University. I want to welcome both of you to the program.
Hi.
Thanks.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Mark, it was so good to have both of you here. Mark, let me start with you. I'll just have to ask the obvious question. How do you say hello in Klingon?
You don't say hello in Klingon. A Klingon would never say hello, how are you, or anything like that. Although people have asked me that question a lot, so I finally came up with a phrase that sort of uses does that function, which is "Nuk neth." And what that means is, what do you want?
What do you want? Okay, I like that. So can you take us back to the very beginning of everything? I mean, how did you first start working on the Klingon language?
Well, I worked on Klingon because a couple of years before that, I worked on Vulcan for Star Trek II, that movie. And they decided to make another movie, and the Klingons were going to be the villains. And because I did Vulcan for the second movie, I guess I was in their Rolodex as the linguist for Star Trek, so they called me for the third movie.
So, Michal, where do you start when creating a language from scratch? I mean, what kinds of things does a linguist have to consider?
Well, there are a lot of different things that linguists consider when they study languages, right? There are the different parts of language, different units like sounds in spoken languages, words that are made up of sounds, sentences that are made up of words, right? And whether, there are a lot of rules that govern how sounds interact, how words are made up, how sentences are structured. And so I don't have any experience in actually constructing a language, but I assume that that's a big deal, a big part of constructing a language. But I think also importantly, you have to consider who the speakers are of the language, who the users are, right? And the world that they live in. Are they aliens? Are they human? What are the customs? So just as Mark was saying that, Klingons would never say hello, right? And that instead they'd say, what do you want? That has to do with their culture and their world. And so that's a big part of creating a language, or about a big part of studying a language is to see how language lives within its culture and how it's used to convey people's belief systems, people's cultural identities.
So, Mark, did you draw any inspiration from any real-world languages when you were creating Klingon?
Not on purpose, for a couple of reasons. The Klingons for Star Trek III, which is where I started with all this, all we knew about them at the time, is what we saw in the original series and what I saw in the script for Star Trek III, and that is Klingons are mean and terrible and awful. So I didn't want their language to resemble anybody's language on Earth, because if it ended up sounding like, I don't know, Thai or something, then I have the entire nation of Thailand upset with me for linking their language to these awful people. It turns out that Klingons over the years have developed into very interesting characters, so maybe it would have been some kind of honor or something. Now, having said that, you can't help but be influenced by what you know. So little pieces of things that I know about crept in there, but not on purpose. And if I realized that I was doing something that sounded too much like Navajo, for example. I'd stop
Hmm.
doing that instantly, switch gears. I wouldn't throw out what I did, but I'd make sure to go off in a totally different direction.
So, Mark, how did the culture of Star Trek kind of inform the language you were creating? Because, as you said, I mean, the Klingons had already been established, right? So, did you have challenges in building that language, kind of knowing what that culture was?
Well, I had to make it fit in with that culture, and the good thing and the bad thing of making up a language for an already existing world, which is what I did for Klingon. And when you make it up for a TV show or movie, um, you have a script, and that tells you what the characters are going to say, what they're going to talk about, and what they're like. So I followed that, and at the very, very beginning, I honestly didn't think beyond that. I made up what I needed to make up for the script and thought that was that. And it wasn't until a few years later that this thing started catching on and people started speaking it all over the place. And then it really expanded.
Yeah. So Mihal, I'm curious about culture. I mean, you spoke about it earlier, but how does language, I guess, shape culture? I mean, let's take the English language, for example, right? I mean, we speak it in the United States, you speak it in England, you speak it in Australia, just to name three. Um, and it's different. I mean, it's the words are the same, but the meanings aren't always the same. And you can get yourself into, a little bit of of trouble if you don't understand the meanings of some of those words.
Absolutely. So if you think about languages like English, like Spanish, like Arabic, where they're spoken really widely in the world, right, by a lot of
Hmm.
different, by citizens of a lot of different countries, who may have different cultural, affiliations and different ways of thinking about the world, it affects the way that they speak, right? I studied abroad in Argentina and South America, and we had to be told that if we studied a standard way of speaking Spanish, that there was a certain verb that we were not allowed to use in Argentina, because instead of taking the train, we'd be telling somebody to something bad. So, so that same verb is used very prolifically throughout Europe, the Spanish world in Europe, but it is not allowed in South America, or it does not carry the same meaning. So the fact that languages are spoken, even languages that are spoken widely, they're influenced by all sorts of things, by contact with other languages, by geographic isolation from others who are speakers of the same language. So that's where we get different dialects from. That's one way to get different dialects. And so there's a lot of things. Language is a living thing, and it changes constantly. And if you are speaking a specific language in different parts of the world and you don't have contact with one another, or you have limited contact with one another, your language is going to evolve differently. And so that leads to different words, different accents, that sort of thing.
Hmm. So, Mark, what kind of impact has creating this language had on your life?
Yeah, it's kind of in some ways taken it over. And I never would have thought that my little one-time gig working on a movie would have such a big effect. But it's the language has never gone away. It's spread all over the place, and as a result of that, I've done traveling I wouldn't have done otherwise. I've met people from all over the place that I wouldn't have met otherwise. So it's become a big part of my life, which was a surprise because, as I say, I thought it was a one-shot deal and that would be the end of that.
So, Mihal, before we go, Boise State, as I mentioned, has an event later this week where people can actually hear from Mark, but they can also hear from Paul Fromer. He created the language spoken in Avatar. So, remind us when and where this is and how can people attend?
Perfect. So the event will be at the Special Event Center here at Boise State in the Student Union building. It'll be at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, this Thursday. And it's free and open to the public. So we hope lots of you join us. And we'll have a wonderful onstage interview with Mark and Paul. And you'll get to hear more about their experiences and about what it's like to work in Hollywood and what it's like to be a linguist.
Well, I thank you both so much for taking time out of your schedules. We've been talking with Dr. Mark Okran, the creator of Klingon, one of the languages on Star Trek, and Dr. Mihal Temkin Martinez, professor and chair of the linguistics department at Boise State University. We've been talking about what it takes to create a language for the big screen, and they'll be speaking more about this topic, as Dr. Mihal Martinez just mentioned, this Thursday at the Boise State campus, which begins at 6:30 in the evening. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.